You never know, right, Mitch? You never know. Would you like to share with our listener, Mitch, why you're so hungover? What happened?
I don't, it just crept up on me, man. I don't know what happened. It was suddenly like I was in the Highlander having a good time. And then 2 seconds later, I was like, right, I need to leave. And then I got home and Joe almost had to put me to bed. I was that bad last night.
2 seconds later or 15 drams later?
Yeah, it could have been a couple of drams. Tatsuya gave me some drams at the Highlander, and let's say I was maybe a little bit overserved there. I blame the Highlander. It's all their fault.
Oh, be careful. Careful. People are listening, Mitch. People are listening. It's not just me, you, and your mother.
Yeah, no, it was a good night though. But yeah, yeah, a little bit not hungover. What was it we called it? Excessive whiskey brand loyalty. Let's call it
Correct.
that. Hello, whiskey lovers. Welcome back to another episode of Not Another Whiskey Podcast with your hungover host, Mitch Beshard, the show where we dive deep into the world of whiskey with a playful and mischievous twist. I'm going to be your guide with my co-host, as always, Nicholas Polacki. How are you, fella?
I am very well. Thank you so much for asking, and I'm hoping I look better than you feel. That's what I'd like to say. But you do look well for somebody that's hungover. You do not look it. You look exceptionally well. I'm
It's,
really
it's
excited about
sad.
today. It's all that makeup that you put on for this podcast. I'm like, it's just an audio. But anyway, I am really excited about today's show. We've got a truly unique guest, somebody that we've never had on before, or even like before, whose real artistic vision has captivated both the art and the whiskey world.
Indeed, mate. Indeed. Today, guys, we're going to be talking to the famous, the one and only Mr. Ernie Button, an award-winning photographer from Phoenix, Arizona. Ernie's work is renowned for its creative exploration of everyday objects, and he's got a particular knack, let's say, of finding beauty in. I don't want to call it the mundane, but it is kind of weird, mundane things that he photographs and makes them look absolutely stunning. His most famous project to date, Vanishing Spirits, the dried remains of single malt Scotch whisky, has taken the whisky community by storm. And if you haven't gone out and bought it yet, go and grab it on Amazon right now.
100%. Ernie's work's been featured in National Geographic, the New York Times, and even in the packaging of one of Macallan's limited edition whiskies. His unique approach combines art, science, and a love for whiskey, capturing the intricate patterns left in glasses after the whiskey has evaporated.
Yeah, indeed. And we're going to be diving into how Ernie does this. He's not going to give his secrets away. I've hung out with Ernie quite a few times and he doesn't really give them away, but we're going to find out the inspiration behind his projects, what it's like to collaborate with whiskey distilleries. Plus, we're going to focus in a little bit on Cerealism as well, where he creates these outer worldly landscapes using breakfast cereals. So enjoy the episode, guys. And Ernie, welcome to the show, sir. How is it going?
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm humbled. It's going quite well.
Good, good.
Ernie, the only thing we didn't say is we've actually spoken quite a few times before. I know Mitch as well. But the other thing as well is you're probably one of the nicest men I've ever met. Like you're
Oh, I
you're you're, you're
appreciate that.
always in a great disposition and smiling, happy, and you just seem happy to be here and doing good stuff. So what's your secret?
You know, um, Quite seriously, the photography I do is I've never ventured into commercial photography per se. So when I'm talking about the passions of photography and the passions of whiskey, it's pure joy. It's the reason why I'm doing photography. I'm not doing it for a paycheck, which would be nice, but I'm doing it because I love it. I love the exploration. I love the discovery of especially the whiskey, but discovering a new project. It's amazing to me. So that's my secret. I don't know if it's a secret or not, but
That's very cool. And Ernie, we met quite a while back now,
yes.
just through Glenfiddich and you coming to Glenfiddich. And I think the first time we met actually was because Melissa, your wife, was an artist in resident at the
Yes.
distillery for 3 or 4 months, and we had that disastrous Indian dinner at Torrin, where we had someone
Yeah.
cook for us. And basically, long story short, they left the curry boiling with a glass lid on top of it, and the whole thing cracked into the whole curry. So we had to go and get takeaway curry that night. So that was pretty fun. But Ernie, it was great to see you again. You're just in Scotland. We hung out at the Mash Tun, had some lunch recently. Melissa was there as well. But great to catch up with you, man. And we've chatted a lot about kind of how you got into whiskey, but it'd be good to hear it for the listeners, how you kind of got into whiskey, how you started this journey. When was it you started kind of delving? Well, let's talk about when you started drinking whiskey before you started photographing it first.
Yeah, the project itself has been going on for a little over 16 years. So my wife came from a Scotch drinking family. She's not Scottish. She's actually Italian. But her dad really influenced her as far as drinking Scotch, appreciating Scotch. And so when I married her and married into the family, I had to kind of step up the Scotch game. And so we were having drinks one night, and we would typically drink out of a rocks glass instead of a Glencairn. And about 17, 18 years ago, the glasses were left out overnight. And so when I went to collect the glasses in the morning, I noticed that there was this delicate film in the bottom of the glass. And when I held it up to the light, I noticed these really fine patterns in the bottom of the glass. And I had just finished a close-up photography project of a artist friend of mine who was photographing agates, rocks with inclusions like moss, sticks, things like that. And so I had the setup all ready to go for this new discovery. And so when I took the glass into the studio, I fired off a roll of film because that's what I was shooting at the time, and waited a week for it to come back from the film developer. And once I saw the images in the film, I knew that there was a project that I could work on and discover. I didn't know that it would last this long and capture my interest for so long, but yeah, that was kind of the genesis.
That's incredible. And so, in your opinion, what makes the patterns in whiskey residues so captivating? Maybe even compared to other, did you look at other residues or sediments? Wait, did you start leaving orange juice out overnight? Did you start leaving your cup of coffee out and pour it into a glass instead of into a mug? Like what made whiskey so impressive in your mind?
Well, the fact that it produced this really intricate pattern that was so delicate yet so precise, that's what kind of made it stand out. You know, if you leave a glass of wine with a little bit of residue in there, it's just going to be kind of a muddy puddle. You know, things like orange juice, things like coffee. Coffee may leave a little bit of an interesting pattern or stain, but it's really the perfect ingredients that is whiskey that is helping to produce these patterns. The fact that it's such a simple product, you know, just 3 ingredients, the yeast, the water, and the grain or the barley, and then, you know, spending years in a wooden cask. You know, that new make spirit, it's clear. But when it spends time in the cask, that's the magic sauce that creates or helps to create these patterns and really starts to outline them. So, you know, initially when I saw it, I'm like, wow, this is very different, you know, and I can do something photographically with this. But once I got into the science of why this is happening and the production of, you know, whiskey and what's going into it, that's when it really kind of piqued all of my interests.
And I think one of the things that we were chatting about, Ernie, is you have looked into the science of this, right? And
Yes.
you've worked with people. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know a lot of our listeners geek out quite a bit on the intricacies of whiskey. So I'm sure they'll want to hear about why this happens in your
Oh,
photography.
absolutely. About 4 to 5 years into the project, I started to wonder, okay, I'm getting some amazing results. Why is this happening? And of course, Google is right there at your fingertips with every computer. And so I went to Google it. And about the time that I was investigating, there was a researcher, Dr. Peter Juncker, who was investigating the coffee ring effect. And he had just published a paper, I think it was through Nature publication, about, what was creating the coffee ring effect. And so I reached out to him through email and I said, hey, kind of stumbled upon this phenomenon with whiskey. Would your paper answer why this is happening? And, he looked at my images and, he compared it against what he was seeing with coffee, and it didn't really match up. He couldn't really explain why it was happening. And so I went back to Google trying to figure out, okay, who would know something about this? And I came upon the name of Dr. Howard Stone, who did some work with Harvard, and he's now at Princeton University. And he is in charge of the complex fluids group over at Princeton University. So he runs all the postdoc, all of their projects, things of that nature. And so I reached out to him by email and, not expecting him to reply or give me information, but lo and behold, nice enough to reply, nice enough to say, hey, I've never run across this. I've done some research, that could answer some of it, but, let me pick up a bottle of whiskey and, we'll try and investigate. And so we got some postdoc students that were interested, because that's really the key for a program like his, is the postdoc people are the ones doing the investigation. It's not him. He's kind of directing their research. So a couple people were interested and they got to work on, why it's happening. And lo and behold, there was a scientific paper produced and published in PRL, Physics Review Letters, back in March of 2016, explaining why this phenomenon happens.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough that they put me as a co-author on the paper. So I have a proper physics paper published.
Very cool.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so on that note, like obviously you've been featured in numerous prestigious publications, not just scientific journals, but obviously a multitude of other kind of mainstream media and global media. How has that exposure impacted your career, and more importantly, has it influenced your artistic process?
It really hasn't influenced the process. It does let me know what is capturing a particular media outlet's interests. The project itself has gone through many different evolutions. Before, I would just take, what the glass was giving me. And then I noticed that it started to have kind of a celestial or outer space look to it. And so I was more leaning into that. And that's how the Planet series was born, where I shaped them more into planets, and that caught the attention of, National Geographic. So I had a nice little feature in National Geographic about 5 years ago when they were celebrating the moon landing, the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. But yeah, I feel very fortunate that so many people have really taken to the project and been willing to publish it and get it out there. There have been some fantastic publications of my work, so I'm truly honored.
That's great. And then, and not only that, Ernie, but one of the things I didn't know actually, and we discussed this last time we met, was the fact that you worked with Macallan and you actually had your work on a bottle of Macallan. So how did that come around, and how did that affect your career as an artist?
Yeah, at the time, Ken Greer was spearheading the distillery, and he is a big lover of the photographic arts. And so he had a program that he had developed called the Masters of Photography. And I was aware of it, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm a big enough name, but I know my work would fit in perfectly with that program, because it's photography, it's the love of whiskey, how can you go wrong? And so, they had worked with big artists like Annie Leibovitz, Mario Testino, Albert Watson, some really great, well-known photographers. And so, I'm not afraid to email people. And if they say no, that's okay. I'll move on. But I emailed the Macallan, not knowing who I would talk to, and it landed in the right person's lap, and they forwarded it on to Ken, and it all happened very quickly after that. They commissioned me to create 12 images made from the Macallan whiskey, which would be featured in duty-free shops. So they were featured on boxes that were sold internationally. And so I think they ended up using 6 out of the 12 images on various packaging. And the more popular one, or the more famous one, is the purple image that's on the Estate Reserve packaging.
Yeah. So I'd say, and I don't know if you know this or not, but Ken and I actually put the Masters of Photography together. That was one of the projects I got to work on with Macallan.
Really?
So yeah, the first one
Awesome.
we ever did was with Rankin.
Yes, yes.
And I ended up being one of the photographs with my own face. So I've had my ugly mug over a bottle of Macallan. Somewhere in Russia, I think I was sold, which sounds about right, doesn't it? Like sold off into the wilderness. But Ken does have a did Ken ask for a free photography lesson because he was following Rankin around and getting all these tips and trades when we did the Rankin project, and then obviously we got to work with Annie and Albert and people like that as well, and it was just incredible. But I imagine Ken would have just absolutely loved what you were doing, because unlike all of those people that were looking to capture the essence of the distillery and the surroundings of Speyside, you're doing micro photography almost, aren't you? Almost like telescopic to some degree.
No, absolutely. If you look at the Masters of Photography project, it was mostly, like you said, people, the environment, with Elliot Erwitt, it was a lot of the surrounding environment of Scotland, whereas mine dealt specifically with whiskey.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, I was a subsection of the Masters of Photography. They called it a capsule edition.
Yep.
Whereas, people like Elliot Erwitt, they got their own whiskey along with the images. Mine was just a whiskey that they were already bottling.
Yeah.
But still,
don't play it down, Ernie. It's a pretty big deal. Not many people in this lifetime get to have their artwork on a Macallan bottle, and more importantly, when we're all long gone, those will be the bottles that trade for gazillions of dollars, I'm sure, at that point.
Well, I've been surprised in the 10 years since this was put out. On the secondary market, that purple bottle is going for 4x, so it's 1,200 pounds,
of course.
going for 200 pounds.
Yeah.
Whereas Nicholas is one, they're actually trying to give it away. They're like, please, someone take this.
Very good. Very good.
I think what's interesting, Ernie, if people are listening here and they haven't seen your work, or if you meet someone in the street and try to explain to them how you capture whiskey, how do you actually describe it?
So I describe it truly as, after you've taken the last drop of whiskey, you've tilted that glass upside down, the last drop has hit your tongue, there's still enough residue in the glass to be able to produce these wonderful patterns, these wonderful images. So it truly is the dried remains of single malt Scotch. That's the elevator pitch, is that it is just enough whiskey information to create these wonderful patterns. And, I can go into the geeky details of how I make the images, and what I'm doing to bring about the best results. But really, it truly is what's left in the glass.
Yeah.
I think as well, what was interesting when we were chatting about it, you were mentioning that you actually see different patterns from different whiskeys from around the world, right? I mean, you mentioned Japanese whiskey and how that was different. So how are you finding that's affecting it, and what do you think the reasons are?
Well, because I'm technically not a scientist, I'm trying to approach it from a science perspective, but I don't have that fluid mechanics background. And so I'm just doing my own experiments, on my countertop at home, trying to figure out, okay, really, what's the difference here? And so a little bit more information on what you're talking about. I've noticed with Japanese whiskey, it produces such a different pattern, such a different dried residue, that I'm like, why is this happening? This isn't playing into Nicholas's side gig.
He doesn't even know. Mitch doesn't even know. Ernie, he has no idea that you've photographed Shibuya. He has no idea. This is news to Mitch. Did you know this, Mitch?
I did actually.
Did you? Ah, there you go.
At the mash tun, I did show him a few images.
Oh,
But,
yeah. Okay.
About a couple months into the pandemic, when everybody was shutting down, I got this email from Lauren over at Shibui, saying, "Hey, we've got this startup whiskey company, where it's a Japanese whiskey company. What can I send you some samples, and can you just play around with them and see if you can get anything?" So I'm like, "Sure." Everything's shut down. I'm not doing anything except going to work. And when I started playing around with the whiskey, it was not giving me any patterns like Scotch whiskey at all. So I'm like, what is going on here? And so I was so concerned that I wasn't getting anything that I'm like, I was really looking at the image trying to see, is there any pattern in there? But I photographed them nonetheless. And when I inverted the colors, all of a sudden I was getting these really fluid organic patterns, nothing like Scotch whiskey. And I'm like, okay, there's something different going on here. And Lauren had sent me a really nice range of different whiskeys. Some I would get these really organic ribbon-like patterns in the dried remains, and others I would get these hash marks. And initially I thought, okay, it's the rice because it's a rice-based whiskey instead of a barley-based whiskey. That's got to be it. But recently I got some barley-based Japanese whiskey. It's called Hakata. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be perfect. It's going to, make a pattern just like Scotch whiskey. And it did not. And so I'm thinking now more it's the koji that they're making these whiskeys with. Instead of just the other yeast that Scotch uses, it's the koji, and I don't know technically if it's a yeast or not, but it's the koji that is probably contributing to the different fermentation.
Yeah. It's actually a fungus, believe it or not, koji.
Okay.
So it's used in usually it's used in conjunction with yeast, but
Gotcha.
it's used to generate the enzymes to convert starches to sugars because you don't malt rice. So so there's no malting process, so it doesn't generate those enzymes. So it's really interesting because I think we sent you some of our malt whiskeys, some of our wheat whiskeys, but you're right, it was the white oak 10-year-old rice whiskey that came back. And I remember you when we got in a call and you explained it, walked us through this inversion process. I was like, it was fascinating, absolutely beautiful pieces of art as well. That's the other thing, right? It was really wonderful to see that. So yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. I reached out to Howard, Dr. Stone over at Princeton. He's my go-to guy with any questions. And he is just the nicest guy. He will entertain any of my questions. Sometimes he'll say, I don't know. But with this, he's like, it's possible that it's the starch that's collecting on the top of the dried sample that's cracking, that's creating these hash marks. So it's very possible that's contributing to it.
That's incredible. So as someone who captures like the essence of whiskey visually, how do you personally enjoy whiskey? And do you have any favorite drams that you go to? And obviously we know you work with lots of different whiskey companies, so we're not looking for you to, it's not obviously that Mitch and I drink everything. There's not a whiskey brand that we don't love or haven't tasted or tried. So, is there ones that step out with you that you're like, these are a good handful of go-tos that you like, that you enjoy?
And building on what you just said, number one, I've only worked with Macallan, is a proper collaboration. So I work with a lot of different whiskeys that I purchase off the shelf, but I've never, truly collaborated with another distillery. But, in keeping with what you just said, we've spent a lot of time in Scotland, and no one really gets offended if you are at a Glenlivet distillery and you say, hey, I really love Macallan. They're like, cool, you love whiskey. That's awesome.
Yeah.
We are big fans of the Balvenie, and we got to taste through the new range, the Curious casks, which are pretty amazing. Let's see, what did we pick up? At duty free, we picked up a Glendronach 10, which is pretty good. We tried this new Fable whiskey.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you guys have heard that.
Yeah.
That was really good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really good.
Yeah. We've been surprised by Fettercairn because we don't get that here in the States. So we've gotten that through duty free.
Yep.
Yeah.
But Faircairn's an interesting one. They used to have a 12-year-old here. They've got young whiskey, and then they've got gazillion-year-old, like 45-year-old whiskey, and like nothing in between. But actually, that's one of the most beautiful distilleries to go and see, just outside of St Andrews.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, in fact, they have a very unique copper ring that sits on the outside of the stills that puts cold water on the external side of the still, and it patinas everything this beautiful blue. Interact. Talk about things that are beautiful
Yeah.
to just visually look at and photograph. And it's one of my favorite distilleries to visit. Daz and I used the last time I went there, it was the previous co-host, Daryl Halden, that took me there. I made such a blast. It's just such a beautiful, pretty distillery.
No, I've read about that process where they've got the cold water going over the outside of the still. Fascinating.
Nicholas, you know the rules, though. We don't talk about Daz anymore.
Oh yeah, sorry. Now I need to do 20 press ups for my penance.
Ernie, one of the things that we chatted about as well is when you look at a lot of your imagery, it almost looks science fiction, like you could be looking at another planet. So have you ever done any collaborations with anyone in the science fiction sort of world? Has anyone ever approached you about anything like that?
Recently, there was, and I say recently, probably within the past year or two, there was a article about an exoplanet like so many light years away from us. And I never really knew how they got those images. So I'm like, did they photograph that? What, how did they get that? And so when I did a little bit of a deep dive, they're doing artist interpretation on all of the data that they're getting from the telescopes. And so one of the images or this article about this distant exoplanet looked almost exactly like an image I had made out of Glenmorangie to sail. And so they had the person that discovered this planet, they had his name in the university. And so, like I said, I don't mind reaching out to people. And I reached out to him. He was at the University of Hawaii. And I said, hey, this is what I do. I found it fascinating that the image that I created with whiskey looked very similar to the planet that you've discovered. And he wrote back and he's like, this is fascinating. And so, I was trying to figure out a way to do some type of collaboration with astrophysicists because my images do look surprisingly like these dwarf planets and these exoplanets that they're discovering. And I haven't found the right vehicle to really, collaborate. But
I think you need to hit up Disney, mate. Hit up Disney and tell them you want to sell them some of the images for the next Star Wars series.
100%. Yeah, it's just.
Can you imagine?
Oh, unbelievable. But actually, Mitch, that's so funny you should say that because it's almost what it feels like, isn't it? These, these planets with multiple moons in the background. What are they going to look and feel like?
Yeah, slip in a whiskey image.
Correct. 100%, Ernie. Why not?
Yeah.
Why not? So on that note, so your book, The Art of Whiskey, combines images of whiskey residue with photographs of Scotland. So how did you approach blending these two elements together?
My wife and I love to travel. That's one of the great things that we love to do. And we've been traveling, since we've been married. We've been married for 31 years, the 6th. So in a couple of days, we're celebrating our 31st anniversary. And so, we've been coming to Scotland since 2010. And now it's a yearly journey that we make to Scotland. My travel camera is this crappy toy camera called a Holga. It was created in 1985. It's a Chinese-based camera. Yeah. And the thought at the time was, let's give the masses something to be able to photograph with. So it uses medium format film. So you get these big fat negatives, which is awesome. And it's crappy. It's made of plastic. The lens is plastic. It leaks light, so I have to tape it up. And the reason why I continue to use it is it reminds me so much of travel, because part of the image is blurry, out of focus, and there are other parts that are much more sharp and clear. And when I think back on a trip, like we were going to China quite often, back in the aughts. And, I remember some details really sharply and other details not so much. And so that's the way the Holga feels to me. And so going to Scotland since 2010, I had a lot of film rolls, developed and processed, and images that had been created over the years that I could use for this book. So some people may gravitate only to these, outer worldly, outer space type images made with whiskey. Others, want that, okay, what does Scotland really look like? And this, was a perfect blend of, this is what Scotland looks like, and this is, the whiskey, how I appreciate whiskey on another level.
So the Holga camera is effectively what Mitch feels like the morning after the night before. He doesn't quite remember all the things, and some details are sharp and some details are blurry.
Right now. That's exactly what's happening. Like, I woke up this morning, I started telling Jo stuff, and she was like, "You told me this last night." I was like, oh, "For fuck's sake, again."
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But Ernie, we're gonna wrap this up in just a second. But just before we go here, what you say, I know you've been coming to Scotland for a long time now.
Yeah.
What is your favorite thing to do over here, or what's the best experience you've ever had in Scotland? Aside from hanging out with me, of course.
Of course. Dang, there are so many. Honestly, when we started coming to Scotland in 2010, we knew a little bit about the country, not much. We knew we were going mainly for the whiskey. But we quickly fell in love with the people, the landscape. My wife and I are from Arizona, very different landscape. At 10 o'clock this morning, it was 107 degrees. And I don't know the centigrade calculation, but that's in the mid to high 40s. And so it's going to be 115 today. When we were on Lewis, the Isle of Lewis, 2 weeks ago, it was 55 and a little bit rainy. So for us, it's wonderful to experience such a wonderful and different climate. But the people have just been wonderful and just very generous and gregarious, and it's refreshing. So that's some of the highlights there. Trying to think of some specific highlights. Because I got to work with the Macallan, I did get to stay in the Easter Elky's house, so that was definitely a highlight. What else?
Most people don't get to do that. That is that's as rare as your whiskey.
Very, very fortunate. This is going to sound dorky, but something as simple as riding a ferry. We don't have ferries here. We barely have mass transportation. And so being able to just ride a ferry and take a boat ride across the sea to another island, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Lastly then, what advice would you give, Ernie, to any aspiring photographers who want to explore unconventional subject matters like you have? Maybe not whiskey, but anything else. What advice would you give to the Ken Greers out there and the younger generation behind them?
Trust your gut. That's the first thing that came to mind when you were talking about that question. I do photography because I love it, not because it's keeping me rich or keeping me in money. I have explored these subjects because I find them interesting, because I find them fascinating. Mitch had mentioned the project Cerealism. That's a project that was born just out of a curiosity of, this cereal aisle is becoming a cornucopia of colors and shapes and things that, just don't appear in nature. And we're supposed to eat these things. And so, I'm a naturally curious person, and I want to explore these different projects. Yeah. And so if you're about making a living as a photographer, my route is not the best route to go. Commercial photography would be, and you have to be willing to, add what the client wants. But, essentially you're taking pictures of, diapers or dog food or whatever. I chose the route I did because I wanted to take photographs of the things I wanted to take photographs of, and so
it feels more artistic. It feels like more like an art form rather than I know the medium is photography, but it feels more like what you're looking at is that like any artist driven by the passion and the things that you find beauty in rather than trying to make money from the process of doing it.
Yes. It's authentically me. So
that's cool.
Yeah. So that's my advice.
Well, Ernie, thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy to see you and speak to you. As always, you've cheered me up. I'm already in a better mood just from having you speak to me for the last 30 minutes. I will be sure to hit you up next time I'm heading out to Arizona. I'd love to grab a whiskey with you and kind of catch up again in person. But thank you so much for being our first artist on the show.
Wow, I'm honored.
And truly just for those people out there that have not seen Ernie's work, like go and buy the books. They're absolutely stunning, just beautiful pieces of art. Like they really are.
Thank you.
And quick, Ernie, we always like to do a quick plug as well. So where can people find the book and all that good stuff?
Yeah, I was going to give a quick note about the book. The publisher has decided not to do a second run. So this is the last run. So if you do come across a copy of it through Amazon, through other book resellers, this is it. Wow. So they're out of stock at the warehouse. So all of the books are in the various channels. Amazon is probably the best bet to find it. But, I've seen it at various other booksellers. But yeah, The Art of Whiskey, pick it up. Charles Macallan wrote the foreword. So I was very honored to have him in the book.
That tells you everything, right? A good friend of the show, a good friend of Mitch's as well. And superb.
Awesome.
All right, Ernie, thank you so much for being on the show. Great to see you as always. I'll see you next time you're in Scotland.
Absolutely. Yes.